Today in the SoulSync community, we're having a chat with Chris, my first time meeting him, and maybe your first time. So it's pretty cool. Chris, welcome. We'll probably kick off with, I've been saying lately, you've done some soul searching and found yourself in the soulbound space. Maybe we can kick off with a bit of background about you and maybe how you ended up interested in soulbounds.
Yeah, sure. So, well, thanks again, firstly, James.
That's all
Appreciate
right.
spending some time and having a bit of a chat about all these interesting things that are evolving in the space. So my personal background is as a software engineer. So I've been building software for the web for a bit over 2 decades, which makes me feel very old. And I guess the TLDR is I actually had a company about 10, 15 years ago that was building software for nonprofit organizations. And in that process, realized that there was this problem where we give our data to other people and we lose control of who we are and our identity. And in this particular example, we were working with organizations that provided counseling services around gambling addiction or drug addiction. And they would have clients that would come and present their story, and they would, have to sometimes retell their story which could be traumatic to them. And then somebody would enter that information to a computer system, and then they would refer that person to 5 other organizations. And that client would have to go and repeat their story 5 times. And I realized there was this structural problem where the way that technology is structured is, putting us out of the loop as individuals. We're losing control over our own story, with the way that we have SaaS business models. And so for me, blockchain seems a way to kind of solve some of these problems. Own your keys, own your crypto. What if you could own your keys, own your data, own your keys, own your soul? And so through that journey, I guess I started Verita, which is about, helping people take ownership of their data and identity. And through that process have also now become involved, in the sort of more recent evolution of some of these ideas, which is obviously soulbound tokens and the concept of, having a soul or some digital representation of who you are is very aligned with, the journey I've been on and the journey that Verita is taking as a public sort of network as well. So super excited by what soulbound tokens can represent, but at the same time, there's a lot of, prior art that's existed over decades around identity and trust and reputation and privacy. And I think there's some of the challenges that we kind of face in this space as well.
Yep, I like it. That's some good energy. And I have a previous life in advertising, and so I understand where you're coming from when people go doing all this stuff and it generates data which is valuable, and we're not really getting we're getting the short straw on that one.
We're not getting the benefit of that, are we?
No, and I actually am also very interested in the spaces that you kind of talked about where people have a lot of private stuff and we're not really leveraging it because you can't really keep it private and it's hard to replicate and own that. So that's very interesting. I imagine probably fair to say that your work in this space predated the rise of soulbounds. I guess it'd be cool to sort of hear maybe where you started and what you were thinking, and then how soulbound tokens or the possibility, and I know that there's different types and formats and we still don't have a whole heap of schemes for them, standards for them, but some are starting to get popular. Maybe some color on how you used to think about things and then maybe how that's starting to change with soulbounds could be cool.
Yeah, sure. So there's, an existing standard that's got nothing to do with blockchain called verifiable credentials, which has been worked on for many years. And it's effectively a way of, somebody signing a piece of data and saying, I assert this about someone. So for instance, I could sign a JSON object about you, James, and say, hey, on this day, 6th of March, 2023, I had a conversation with you.
Yep.
And then you could have that, and then you can go and share and prove that in any way you want to somebody else. And if the other person trusted my public key, they would be able to trust that data came from me. So verifiable credentials is a standard around the way that those signatures are formed and the way that data is structured and the schemas and the types of ways that you can make assertions about people. So that's been around way well before blockchain. It's constantly evolving. And so with Verida, we're all about owning our your data, and a part of that is also owning proofs or verification. So when COVID happened, suddenly there was all this talk about proving your vaccination status or proving something about your health, and verifiable credentials is a really great way of doing that. And so what we did is we did some proof of concepts around what if you could receive a signed proof of, like, say, your COVID vaccination, and then store that in a self-sovereign private encrypted storage that is completely owned and controlled by you as an individual. And then you could selectively choose and disclose that to people that you want on a peer-to-peer kind of basis. So that was sort of at least my first kind of interaction with taking the concept of owning your data and extrapolating that to being able to assert something about yourself or somebody else asserting something about you. And what's interesting about that is, healthcare data is something that is intrinsically very private and something that you don't want to broadcast to the world.
Yep.
And so I came into this lens in a very privacy-centric focus, thinking about how do we have all of our data, keep it private, and then selectively disclose, either on an individual basis or perhaps on a public basis, that data. Through that journey, I guess I've realized that there's a lot of issues around interoperability. There's standard around credentials. There's lots of standards in tech. But in some ways, some of the standards have so many options that they end up not being a standard because they're so complicated. And I've definitely seen that a lot in the identity space around different there's these things called DID methods, decentralized identifiers, there's VCs, verifiable credentials, there's a whole bunch of standards here, but they've struggled for adoption. I think part of that reason has been that they are quite complicated. And then obviously more recently, soulbound tokens has come about. And in terms of, I guess, addressing your question in terms of shifting my thinking, soulbound tokens are, at least today, intrinsically public. And they're on a blockchain, which obviously is effectively a permanent store of sort of information. But blockchain has a great amount of composability. The ability to put something on a blockchain and then anybody can kind of interoperate or interact with that information or data is its real strength. And I guess I can see the contrast between this sort of verifiable credential space, which has sort of been very structured and strict and very almost pedantic in its approach.
Yep.
But that's come at the expense of interoperability and composability. Whereas in some ways, soulbound tokens has sort of come out of the existing composability environment of a blockchain and is sort of a very simple kind of modification on the NFT standard to a certain degree, and has everything that's public. And I think that there's an ability then to move faster because from an adoption perspective, it's easy to adopt. But it also means I know there's all these other challenges that these other people have sort of addressed that will need to be addressed at some point with the way that SBTs work. And I think that the SoulSync community is sort of on the front line of that, of thinking about revocation and thinking about privacy and zero knowledge and how that can kind of incorporate in the space. So I guess, yeah, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think there's two real different approaches there. One has been very rigid and slow, and the other one, I guess the blockchain space, is sort of a bit looser, but faster. And I think that there's an opportunity there to actually make this more mainstream than perhaps the other approach has taken.
Yeah, can definitely, I see it. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's like there's some trade-offs for the speed. It means sometimes you can move faster than you're able to be, I guess, thoughtful. And there's like do you move fast or do you really pause and think about the implications of what you're doing and if it actually addresses the root and things like that. But I think once we get into the rhythm of it, and I mean, that's kind of the idea of these videos as well, is like, I think we just got to boost how fast we communicate and the flow of information so we can start to make more informed decisions. I guess, yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to, there's so many different angles we could explore here. I've spoken to a couple of people so far on a range of topics, but one of them that is a consistent theme is this one of identity. And I think it's, there's like two sort of sides of the coin, right? One is if you have a soulbound and it's to your public address, and that's like it could have some very personal information in there, or it could lead a lot of insight to others where they find your wallet and then they can see your trade flow, they can see what you're interacting with, and you might lose some sort of privacy there. And then the other flip side is like, we shouldn't tie it to an identity at all. Like there should be a way for things to be anonymous without losing the ability to have soul bounds. And it's a tricky kind of conundrum. I think that's probably like fair to say where this little ecosystem is at in terms of debate. It seems like I'm not massively across everything, but to me, I'm starting to pick up that seems to be like a point of not contention necessarily, but debate. I know that I had a very brief look at the website for what you're up to. I can see you've got what looks like a lot of privacy controls. So like, how do you think of soulbounds playing a role where like they have the utility that you want them to, so that if you participated in something and you got a soulbound, only those people can have a say or talk about how the next event could be better because they attended the event, their feedback matters. How do you think we might go about protecting kind of like, yeah, people's what they want to keep private, what they're happy keeping public? I guess, do you have views on what might be a good approach there? Because I'm sure it's not just you and I that's kind of curious about it.
Yeah, we've got pretty strong opinions. I mean, I've been building in this space for a while, and I guess one of the things that we identified with Verida is that this is a huge problem. That was 2 years ago. So that was more broadly around this problem around identity, blockchain wallets, and how do we think about that? So I guess I think that the first principle is that as a user, you need to control over what's public and what's private. So I feel like that's a really sound starting point. And I think the other thing to be aware of is that in reality, we have lots of different blockchain addresses and we sort of end up using them for different purposes. And people are sort of trying to always think of how do I sort of have some stuff that's kind of a bit public, some stuff that's a bit private. And it's a problem more broadly in sort of the blockchain space, I believe. My take is that we need an identity layer that sits outside of the blockchain. And when there is some sort of, like going to an event, getting some sort of attestation that you were at an event, that should go to your non-blockchain wallet identity. And it should be and so therefore it's first and foremost private for you as an individual. But what you should be able to do as a user is to then control what you do with that. So I could share that with you privately, or I could, maybe I've got a Ethereum wallet and I want to mint that as an SBT on my Ethereum wallet. Maybe I've got a Polygon address and a Near Protocol address, and maybe I want to mint it on those two as well. So like, there's a distinction there, I think, between separating your identity with a blockchain wallet, and you get by de facto there the ability to think about things being multi-chain. And so suddenly now, because I've got this thing that I control, first and foremost, you just need to have the ability to mint SVTs on different chains, and suddenly you can start to have complete composability and flexibility, and you unlock on each of those chains perhaps respective apps or communities that you can then participate in with that same single kind of token per se.
Do you think that it has to be, or that it will be binary in the sense of you start with it, it's on your side, you control it, it's just a signed message, so you can prove that you're allowed to mint, right? But once you mint, is it then public, or is there, do you think, a pathway where I mint, but only you as my friend can see it? Like, how do we, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll probably have both. I think we'll start with public. That's easy. We've been doing some work with Polygon ID, who they're probably they would be one of the leaders in the world, I guess, in terms of zero knowledge proofs, both on and off chain. And they've just made an announcement, I think, last week, where they can effectively issue one of these credential things in the way that I mentioned, and then you can put it on chain and use it in a smart contract and only, make available the information to the third party that you want. So the tech's there, it's coming. And so I think it's really going to be use case driven. If I'm happy to say I was at ETH Denver and I want to make that really public, then I'll make that public.
Yep.
If I was at a private event at ETH Denver that I then want to, prove to someone that I was there, but do that privately, we want to be able to do that too. And the technology will be there for us to have that flexibility. The challenge though then becomes around the user experience. How do we give these tools to users and do that in a way that makes sense and articulates some of the subtlety around what you can do there, and applications need to think about that and across the whole layer. So again, coming back to that point before, it's kind of easy to do the first piece if it's basic, but as soon as you get more complexity, you have challenges on the user experience side and on the developer tooling side and things like that.
Yep, and I think it's like you run the risk of V1 off-chain, on-chain public, and you get like a scope of use cases where that's applicable, but I think it doesn't fully unlock a lot of the, like, there's more complexity, but it's also where you start to, I think, get more exciting where like I can share very private things and now access small groups where we can all discuss our very private things to us kind of bits. I think it's pretty interesting. I guess there's one topic that I haven't really dived into too much with others that you might have a view on is around like the soul bounds are great. You get them and your wallet's got it and it's got whatever it stands for, whatever it stands for, it has its meaning. But if I lose my keys, or I mean, if you lose your keys, you're pretty cooked. But if I decide that my wallet security is compromised, like I realize, oh, I probably shouldn't have started this on a web wallet and it's time to migrate to a hardware wallet. The non-transferability of SBTs is something that I like. Don't know if I've seen like a real view on like what the best way to handle that is, so that you can recover your wallet or shift the assets over while avoiding it turning into a secondary market where you can just trade them.
Yeah, so well, the approach I mentioned earlier actually solves this problem as well, because if the the representation of the proof is given to me as an individual that's not linked to a particular wallet, then I have the ability to mint that as many times as I like, but the smart contract on that chain will only allow me to mint that once, or whatever the rules are around that particular SBT.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so using those keys, I could then unmint and then remint. So we're actually able to kind of again put the user back in control and have a structure there that that kind of solves that problem. So that's one approach. If you look at where we're at today in terms of the model I'm talking about is something that we're building or built, but not necessarily what the status quo is today. If you look at the status quo today, I think account abstraction will have some tooling here that will probably help around, I guess, this type of rekeying and controlling of accounts.
It does seem that way. I'm not too familiar with account abstraction. It's like one of those bookmarked topics, especially it's like building up. I'm like, okay, now it's past the audit. Like I should really understand this. Do you have like a high level of it?
I won't profess to be an expert, and I have read a little bit, but I've actually heard lots of different kind of takes as well. So I wouldn't want to say something that I don't think is necessarily correct. But
well, that's okay. We've got like that's the disclaimer, and that's like, what's your intuitive read on it? I guess.
Well, I think the key. I mean, I guess I'm always looking at this from a lens of what's existed in the past. And if I could step back again to this sort of previous space that I mentioned around verifiable credentials and decentralized identifiers, there's a whole bunch of standards there. And one of those is having the concept of an identifier with a controlling key. And then and it's called a controller. And you can then rekey all the time. And so that is the model that account abstraction, as far as I can understand, is kind of looking to replicate. You've got the ability to kind of change and have flexibility around the controller of a particular account, and that gives you a whole bunch of flexibility. Gnosis Safe obviously is a way of doing that today, but actually building this into the protocol. And through that process, you unlock all sorts of other things around getting other people to be able to pay for transactions and paying for transactions in different tokens. You get a whole bunch of sort of more flexibility, I guess, at that protocol layer.
Okay.
So I guess the TLDR there is there's a whole bunch of stuff there that we still haven't really fully explored because it hasn't gone live yet. And a lot of those are going to be tools that are going to help facilitate thinking about identity and thinking about what a wallet is and how that's a little bit more composable. And I think they're going to be necessary. I think they're going to be very valuable tools in this concept of a SBT and how we think about moving them or revoking them or reissuing them.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably my capture of it before, and on top of this is, yeah, it seems like this is it's an enabling technology improvement. Like you start to get more stuff. What we'll do with it, I guess we'll have to wait and see, but it's probably one of those things that's worth figuring out exactly how it works. It's on my to-do list. Well, that's really cool. I'm trying to do my best in these little chats to like keep it on the soulbound skew. But obviously everything, like there's implications for soulbounds that come from not soulbound topics and vice versa. But I guess maybe a small bit on outside of soulbounds, what are some of the areas that you're thinking could create a lot of unlock or like really interesting passions for you that you might want to share? What do you think is pretty hot?
Well, I guess what I think is going to be, well, in terms of what's hot, Twitter, Elon Musk has taken over Twitter, and this has created this resurging kind of interest, I think, in terms of how we communicate, social media, what's its role, thinking, Twitter being a centrally run and owned platform versus now there's a lot more interest, I think, in decentralized social media platforms. And, it's really interesting to see the public conversation has shifted, I think, in the last 12 months in that there's a sense that there needs to be some sort of decentralized social media platform as an alternative to the current kind of gatekeepers. And there's a bit of an arms race on there, I think, to try and find what that looks like. Just quickly there, as a side note, I think if history's shown us anything, it's that whatever we think a decentralized social media network will look like, whatever the next iteration of a social network looks like, it probably doesn't look like anything that exists today. So I think there is a word of caution. There are people that are just trying to replicate Twitter. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to work. I think it needs to be something that's a bit different, which is interesting because I think that's where we have a deficit today around trust and reputation. We get scammed or people trying to scam us all the time in Web3 and crypto. There's always this, sense of who am I interacting with, or we move in such a fast-paced world today that we, it's hard to keep up with who somebody is and how we know them, and there's a whole sort of range of issues there. I think that are kind of modern problems.
Yep.
And social networks are, the key way that we kind of discover other people and connect and form these sort of micro communities. So I'm really interested to see where that goes in the next sort of 24 months. And I think that bringing the concept of SBTs, which is really bringing some trust and reputation to people and tying that with social, I think that's going to become a really interesting kind of unlock. With the work we're doing at Verita, we're looking at how we can allow anybody to mint an SBT based on their Web2 accounts and prove information about themselves. So from a professor on LinkedIn, I could mint an SBT to prove that, or I own this Twitter account and have 100,000 followers, I can sort of mint an SBT to prove that. So trying to migrate that existing trust from centralized platforms and bring that across to the composable world of Web3. And I think that if you can try and bring increased trust and reputation to these social platforms, then there's a real opportunity to kind of disrupt the incumbents because they have a monopoly on that trust and it's pretty poor at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess it depends what the trust and reputation is being brought on chain to what it's being leveraged for on chain as well. Like, because I keep seeing stuff about, KYC, AML, and then on chain proofs for it and stuff. But and then that's fine, that's all good for certain use cases. But if you're then trying to like go, oh well, that's a real individual, they get one vote in the DAO. The fact is, there's just so much leaked PII out there that someone can go and probably spin up a whole bunch of accounts. So it's like, how do you like, what's the hybrid model there where you really weight the trust? But it definitely is an indicator. If you look at someone's profile and you can click on the LinkedIn and you can form your own view of if you think it's a real account or not, at least that's better than nothing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a start. I think there's proof of humanity. There's a few projects trying to do that. You're right. I mean, if you take a human lens, you can just go and click through and sort of get a sense of who someone is and whether you would trust it. If they've got 5,000 followers on Twitter and one on LinkedIn, it's like, but if they've got 3,000 on LinkedIn, it's like, okay, maybe this is and they've got regular content. So I think, and to sort of zero in on that point a little bit more, one of the things that we're doing with Reader that's a little bit different to everyone else is we're a data network. So we're helping people pull all of that data across. So you could mint a soulbound token that says, hey, I'm Chris on LinkedIn. But more than that, you could actually pull all of my LinkedIn posts and create that in a content feed. So that example you gave of kind of going across these different networks and checking stuff, we're trying to actually give people all of their data in one spot. So you wouldn't even have to go anywhere else. It's just, I could publicly make all my data available from different sources and really try and, ironically, centralize all of the information about me, but around myself rather than in other platforms.
That's really interesting. I've been thinking about that in a similar tangent actually, where like you might not be able to own the data that exists already that third parties hold on your behalf or on their behalf, but you probably can copy it and then continue to build on top. And
Exactly.
yeah, that's pretty useful. There's obviously a huge treasure trove of data that you can't just copy because Facebook's not going to hand over like their little persona on you. But one day they won't need to. You really you just need to get to enough that you can continue. Don't necessarily need to pull it all.
Well, if you've got all of the stuff that you've created, at the very least, you can then delete that Facebook account and then push that data into Nostr or into Farcast or some other alternative. At least then again you've got control. But there's a migration path there from Web 2 to Web 3, which we think is super important.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm just curious now, when you're looking at that process, is it something that's like a timestamp? So like you import it as of X date, or is it something where you can post on Twitter and it immediately flows into your sort of account?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting technical deep dive we could go there, but the TLDR is it's ongoing. So you kind of like connect your account and it's ongoing. There's a whole bunch of challenges there to do that in the most decentralized, self-sovereign way as possible because these platforms are centralized and this is decentralized. You need to kind of bridge that gap.
Yep.
But just one of the key things there is we do it in such a way that your phone, because your phone has your private key, your phone is actually the one that's pulling the data and then republishing it. So it's not necessarily instant because there's no centralized bridge running there. It's effectively happening on your phone because we're trying to do that in the most decentralized, self-sovereign way as possible.
Yeah, otherwise you end up with an engineer that can look at it, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. Yeah. I like that. Oh wow, we could probably go in all sorts of different directions. I'll bring it back to the soul bounds. Is there any aspect of soul bounds that like it's kind of like crypto comes out, everyone's thinking finance. I know that you're definitely skewing much more towards like the not finance, although it might be native. Is there any other like hidden eggs that you think people are kind of just not recognizing or that are prime for some disruption with soul bounds, like in other industries that maybe aren't social, if that's what you're kind of playing in, maybe like I don't know, education or defense or health?
I think discovery. So think about healthcare. So let's say let's say I've had knee surgery, hypothetically, right? And let's say in this future world, I've been able to pull my health data down, and I have this my actual data, but I'm interested in earning some money, and so maybe I'm able to get an SPT minted from my hospital that says, yes, Chris has had a knee operation in 2026 or whatever. So a researcher could potentially then have a look and search on chain for anybody that has an SBT that matches sort of knee problems.
Yep.
And then, using a decentralized messaging protocol could ping me and say, hey, we're offering $50 a month for anybody that, streams their health data for the 12-month period that, they had a knee operation of this particular type.
Yep.
And so what's happened there is an SBT has been a proof of something that has then enabled you to be discovered. And then there's an off-chain, on or off-chain, doesn't really matter, but there's a sort of a private way of connecting and then doing something based on that discovery. And so if you generalize that, I think you can take that approach across every industry. It could be, from a marketing perspective,
Yep.
Hey, I'm happy to be marketed to about, remote control cars because my kid wants a remote control car for Christmas. Yep. And so suddenly, so I think
and then after Christmas, stop showing me the ads.
Yeah, I'm going to, I'll delete that SPT, right? And
I've bought
the
thing.
So, exactly.
And you're still showing me ads because you're bidding up the other people in the auction house, right? Yeah, I've got an ad background from before. And that's always been something that's irked me. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. We're doing research on depression for people that had a knee surgery between this date that are male and this demographic and this blah, blah, blah. And
suddenly you can do multiple SPTs and do some sort of searching and filtering on the graph or something like that. And suddenly we've got this really interesting kind of global query engine around individuals that's consensual.
Yep. And they get rewarded for it as opposed to someone else. Yeah.
Correct.
I like it. That's why I'm bullish on the space. Yeah, well, that's exciting. This has been fun. We'll probably wrap it there and put it in the chat and allow people to digest and then come up with their own concoctions and sort of spool off what we've spoken about. Chris is obviously in the Telegram, so hit him up if you want to pick things apart or add your sort of context. And yeah, thank you for joining. Welcome to the community. I'm glad to be a part of this community since you're in it, and that was fun.
Awesome, mate. Really appreciate it. And awesome. Great to have you in the community, and this is a great initiative. So I hope everybody in the community takes it up and we get an opportunity to kind of learn more about who's in the group. And as you said, communication is key. Sharing information and knowledge and some of the opportunities in this space is why we're all here. So kudos to you to making this happen as well.
I'm all here for it. Nice one. Take care.
Cheers.